El imposible realizado. 30º Festival Internacional de Poesía de Medellín.
La poesía es encuentro del hombre con la vida, de la vida con el sueño, del sueño con almas que no son la suya, de esas mismas almas con la inmortalidad. La poesía es encuentro de eso que buscamos y que nos busca a su vez, de la palabra que decimos y de la palabra que nos dice. Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a esta lectura que continúa con la celebración de los 30 años del Festival Internacional de Poesía de Medellín. La tarde de hoy nos acompaña el poeta australiano Les Wicks. El equipo para esta emisión somos el lector e intérprete Mario Ángel Quintero y quien les habla, Carlos Andrés, los acompañará en la presentación. Quiero recordarles que esta emisión se realiza a través de nuestras redes sociales, Facebook y YouTube, y que estaremos recibiendo sus comentarios en ellas. Además, les recuerdo que si quieren una información mucho más detallada de cada uno de los participantes de este festival, o que si quieren adquirir nuestras memorias, pueden hacerlo en nuestra página www.festivaldepoesiademedellin.org. Quiero recordarles también que este festival se realiza por la confluencia de más de 200 invitados y de un pequeño pero dedicado equipo organizativo y técnico. Además, que contamos con el apoyo de la Alcaldía de Medellín a través de su Secretaría de Cultura Ciudadana, el Ministerio de Cultura de Colombia, a través de su Programa Nacional de Concertación Cultural y la Fundación Right Livelihood Award, que es la encargada cada año de entregar el llamado Premio Nobel Alternativo y con el cual fue galardonado el festival en el año 2006. Les Wicks nació en Australia, un gran país ubicado en Oceanía. Como el nuestro, Australia es un país joven, aunque con una gran y ancestral historia, la cual, oculta en sus tierras, sus aguas y sus aborígenes, se hace presente, directa o indirectamente a través de las manifestaciones culturales, artísticas y literarias de sus habitantes. Aunque gran parte de Australia es desértica o semiárida, la riqueza de su biodiversidad consiste no en la cantidad de especies, sino en sus cualidades únicas. Del mismo modo, dada su ubicación espacial particular, Australia, en vez de cerrarse en sí misma, ha sabido abrirse al mundo. Es por esto por lo que sus manifestaciones culturales y artísticas, fuertemente influenciadas por la inmigración y por los países asiáticos vecinos, cuentan con el vigor y la originalidad de un país que hace su propia historia. Ahora les voy a contar quién es Les Wicks. Les nació en Australia en 1955. Es poeta, editor y periodista. Por 30 años ha sido una figura fundamental en la poesía australiana. Ha publicado 14 libros de poemas. Por 45 años ha presentado ampliamente su obra en Australia y a nivel internacional. Sus poemas se han publicado en más de 350 revistas, antologías y diversos periódicos de 30 países y en 15 idiomas. Dirige Moise Press, que se centra en proyectos de divulgación tales como la poesía en autobuses y en poesía publicada sobre la superficie de un río. Algunos de sus libros de poemas: La vanguardia duerme esta tarde, del 81, Caníbales, del 85, Cosquilleo, del 93, Apetitos de la luz, del 2002, Historia del pie, del 2004 y Los ambrosiacos, del 2009. Pertenece al comité coordinador del Movimiento Poético Mundial en Australia. con nuestro abrazo y nuestra bienvenida. Les, ¿cómo estás?
Buenas tardes. My heart goes out to all those who are suffering at the moment, particularly I know in Colombia. My first poem explores the Australian desert, and I'll just explain. Aeolus is the ancient Greek god of the winds.
Mando mi corazón a todos que están padeciendo de ese tremendo virus en Colombia. Buenas tardes. Va a leer acerca del desierto australiano y quiere comentar que Eolo era el dios o es el dios del viento de la Grecia antigua.
Aeolus at the Mulga. The desert wind wears a blunt. The desert wind wears a blunt dust. Cantankerous yap lifts sheet metal from the depths of the snub-nosed Silverton buses, all cut like raw opal, pressed into a humiliating servitude. Windbreaks for camels, punctuation for crows. The land is your lungs, but flies have retired as the gale wails. Ants flummox by vertebrae of quartz, red-veined. Beneath this lee, my eyes are lost. This wind is a tide, only bones bask on gasping sand. That roof spine sits prissy 90 degrees against the perimeters of stone. Go deep, don't assume, refrain. A huff of emus disperse like seeds as I approach. This is a vacated day. Feet crash on pepper. We have built much, the skipsy jeans that jitter past our hands. Falter. This adamance shuts the mouth, comes over, spits that coming shine. We smelt from rocks, death by a purpose still destiny to bend. The nuisance of new sense. Only dry scat is left on the 100-kilometer mat. Concession is prayer, excoriation. We make brushes. God could be a wind, and heaven is a spot safely away from its hands.
Eolo en la Mulga. El viento del desierto luce un polvo rudo, quejido irascible que levanta las latas desde las muertes de los chatos buses Silverton, todos cortados como ópalo en bruto, reclutados a una humillante servidumbre, refugiados del viento para camellos, puntuación de cuervos fijados al aire. La tierra en tus pulmones, pero las moscas se han retirado mientras el viento aúlla. Hormigas perplejan, vértebras de cuarzo de venas rojas. Bajo esta orilla mis ojos están perdidos. Este viento es una marea. Solo huesos se asolean sobre la arena que lucha por respirar. Esa columna de canguro se asienta fastidiosa 90 grados contra los perímetros de piedra. Profundiza, no asuma. Un resoplido de emúes se dispersa como semillas mientras me aproximo. Este es un día evacuado. Los pies crepitan sobre pimienta. Hemos construido mucho. Los genes saltantes tiemblan más allá de nuestras manos, desfallecen. Esta dureza de diamante cierra la boca, se monta, escupe ese brillo venidero forjado de las rocas. Morir a través de un propósito, doblar un destino inmóvil, el problema de la nueva connotación. Solo queda mierda seca sobre la estera de 100 kilómetros. Concesión es rezo. Exoriación. Hacemos cepillos. Dios podría ser viento y el cielo un sitio a salvo, lejos de sus manos.
All of these poems read today will be from my book El Asombrado, translated by Mario, who's reading them in Spanish. All of our continents have had stories of refugees. The next poem is one of them.
Sí, todos los poemas que se van a leer son del libro de Les que se llama El Asombrado, y las traducciones son mías. Todos los países de todos los continentes han vivido ese acontecimiento que es los refugiados.
Sky Trail. This one is, or is called, a witch perhaps, so she disappears, her only trick. Why travel no home, an inflexible judged word, foolhardy for any to claim, but she was there, a tough, demountable equivalent. Some can't tell the difference up close, under torture, your head beneath a clean, cruel pond. Her skin is her bag, and now flag. Great western winds weigh down the air, oddly cold. Her fingers clutch documents. They are a calumny of prayers against labile ink. Suspicious eyes fear the war cry of these new clerks. Given enough time, and that's the story. The teacher and the cash register. Some piteously bright future which is taken. We'll all be surprised.
Rastro en el cielo. Esta es, o es llamada, bruja, quizás. Entonces desaparece. Su único truco. ¿Por qué viajar sin hogar? Una palabra inflexible, juzgada, ilusa, para que cualquiera la reclame. Pero ella estaba allí. Un equivalente resistente y desarmable. Algunos no advierten la diferencia de cerca, sometida a tortura, tu cabeza bajo una cruel y limpia laguna. Su piel es su costal y ahora bandera. Grandes alas del oeste pesan sobre el aire. extrañamente fríos, sus dedos aprietan documentos. Son una calumnia de rezos contra tinta adaptable. Ojos recelosos. Miedo es el grito de guerra de estos nuevos empleados. Pasado el tiempo suficiente, esa sí es una historia. El maestro y una caja registradora, algún futuro piadosamente brillante que se llevarán. Todos estaremos sorprendidos.
User manual men. The trick in all this trickiness is to deceive the nasty inner thing called our hardy skins. Sure, you have access to tools. Use the river's sun-cut pills of tranquility and outboards, perhaps. Go see a woman take her touch 5 times per day. Painting houses and epiphanies. There is always the excuse wrapped in a criminal shrug. One long declining tide, our story reveals wonders and desiccates simultaneously the horrible harmony of our aging. Aim for the stars. Rural state blokes can shoot 1 item per day. Even just nailing an argument, there's convulsion and guts. We never clean up afterwards. Spit flies the driver's side window of a metallic green Mazda. There is beauty everywhere and trajectory within vapors. Men fearlessly remove their fellow household pests, cockroaches, rodents. Take us out for a run, the north wind, hurtling laughter through our thinning hair. We sing badly and rarely, but with great passion. Let us repair the shower screen. Hold our cocks, then lead us to your pleasure. We are better than cats for most household camaraderies.
Manual del usuario. Hombres. El truco en toda esta truculencia es engañar la repulsiva cosa interna que llevamos bajo nuestras endurecidas pieles. Claro, tienes acceso a herramientas. Usas las pastillas del río, cortadas por el sol, de la tranquilidad y motores de lancha quizás. Ve a ver una mujer, toma su caricia 5 veces al día. Pintando casas y epifanías, siempre existe la excusa envuelta en un levantar de hombros criminal. Una marea larga que declina. Nuestra historia revela maravillas y diseca simultáneamente la horrible armonía de nuestro envejecer. Apúnteles a las estrellas. Las reglas declaran que los fulanos pueden dispararle a un ítem por día, aunque sea solo para clavar un argumento. Hay convulsión y tripas. Nosotros nunca limpiamos después de. Un gargajo vuela desde la ventanilla del conductor de un Mazda verde metálico. Por donde quiera hay belleza y trayectoria dentro del humo. Los hombres sin temor eliminan a sus semejantes plagas de hogar, cucarachas, roedores. Nosotros somos un problema que no es que sea insuperable. Debería ser manejado con tolerancia y vigilancia. Aconsejado acerca de ropa apropiada y formado hasta la sensibilidad. Lo que decimos sí es lo que somos. Nos llevan a trotar, el viento del norte lanza su carcajada a través de nuestro escaso cabello, cantamos mal y raramente, pero con gran pasión. Déjanos reparar la cortina de la ducha, agarra nuestras vergas y luego condúcenos a tu placer. Somos mejores que gatos para la gran mayoría de las para la gran mayoría de camaraderías domésticas.
Welt. We bring death and our grasses. Savannah sacks across the seas, dressed as plenty and called colonization. Sharpshooters, architects, meaningless salmon in shoes, pitter-patter is the matter. Lawn is superseded, tarmac cravat, buck formal pretend it's just a phase. The beasts of our darker part trail behind tails tucked, a false concession, all slaver in pure certainty, lap at the leaving life. What about art? It is flame. We lope towards the endless, grass half full, always choose to stay.
Pradera africana. Traemos la muerte y nuestros prados. La sabana saquea a través de los mares, vestida de opulencia, y se le dice colonización. Francotiradores, arquitectos, sin sentido, salmones en zapatos. Un asunto de pisadas infantiles. La grama se reemplaza, la pista, una corbata de alquitrán, siervos de traje formal. Fingimos que solo es una fase. Las bestias de lo más oscuro nuestro nos siguen con las colas entre las patas. Una falsa concesión. Todos babean con la certeza de lo puro. Lamen la vida de irse. ¿Y del arte qué? Es llama. Galopamos hacia lo infinito. El prado medio lleno siempre elija permanecer.
The League of Lovely Women. Don't think their shields are mirrors. I love their fierce white teeth. My women roar. Face paint shatters on a belly laugh. They plot with a potted glare, then march on down the stair without wobble, wand, or weave. Cloaked in the black cloth of fire and desks. One pride, strange, strange partners, they adopt their wounds. No wife, maid, no nun or mum is tamed. Their neck sometimes submits while brain punches back. We Strutting sons stomp blithely on a perilous parquet. There's more, you say, and you'd be right. Hold them to your ear, then hear the gibber of the waves. Crazy as men, contentment is suborned intent. They are everywhere like headlights randomly illuminate as they move and sometimes choose to shine on you.
La Liga de las Mujeres Hermosas. No creas que sus escudos son espejos. Adoro sus colmillos blancos. Mis mujeres rugen. El maquillaje se quiebra en pedazos sobre una carcajada. Ellas conspiran con miradas fijas, arraigadas en materas. Luego marchan escalas abajo sin tambaleo, bastón ni traspié. Enfundadas en la negra tela de fuego y escritorios, un orgullo merecido. Extrañas, socias extrañas, ellas adoptan sus heridas. Ninguna esposa, mucama, monja ni mamá se ha amaestrado. A veces bajan la cabeza, pero sus cerebros devuelven puños. Nosotros, sus hijos pomposos, despreocupadamente pisoteamos el parqué peligroso. Hay más, dices tú, y seguro estarías en lo cierto. Pégalas a tu oído. Luego escucha el mascullar de las olas, demente como hombres. La placidez es la intención sobornada. Ellas están por todas partes. Como farolas, iluminan al azar al moverse. Y a veces eligen iluminarte. Ahora seguimos con el último poema de Les de esta presentación, que viene en forma de un video que él nos ha preparado.
Like a currawong's wing combing tangles of air, or the pulse of water skin on this sated lake. Ah, let me be lazy. Beside the bat squeal shift pitch fruits of a roosting tree, twigs accrete by the hand-span brook, a minute dam of tadpole consequence. White cockatoos weed, grumble, we cannot ask for still, so let me be lazy. Stock markets crumpled and sore, money gibbers around the globe, roads stretched to fit our waistline as soldiers camp on contended land. The Cyrillic of white on the black swan's wing is no battle plan for any general, but my eyes are indolent, those paths won't crack the world. A cranky call from the water hen to planes overhead, then I am back amongst gesticulated arguments still based in the caves. We need more, they want ours, greed and fear again. Willows trawl the lake, eels archive the histories of mud. Time to replace the tribal gods. They've started and won every war. The peoples of the book should throw those books away. There comes a time when blood outweighs the ink. So let me be lazy. I have painted all the pretty specks, done the overstand, then the understand without illuminates or audience. My father is dead. Let the wet, cold tortoises mind the plinth. We'll sing our hymns to fish. A seagull is whisking a cloud in the shallows. Your sleep is disturbed, your lunch. What surrounds us is not serene. Crows are singing, little lamb, each weed is a contest, but it's the violence of the blinking eye, hum of the skin. So let me be lazy. Chain each man of power to weathered wooden benches until the infusion of bird calls subdues their hands. Immobilized eyelids will surrender to a day of casual forage. It's simplistic to say, simplistic to deny. We need peacekeepers to patrol our heads with lazy as our prayer, train ourselves to say enough. Intelligence will listen as each day becomes its own statement of intent.
Al igual que el ala de un pájaro curabón peinando enredos de aire, o el pulso del odre de agua en este lago saciado, ay, déjenme ser ocioso. A la vera del turno del chillido del murciélago, frutos de hollín de un árbol que anida los chamizos se acumulan junto al arroyo estrecho. Un diminuto dique de consecuencia renacuaja, blancas cacatúas se malezan, refunfuñan, aún no podemos pedir quietud, así que déjenme ser ocioso. Los mercados de bolsas se desinflan, luego se disparan, el dinero balbucea alrededor del mundo, los caminos se estiran para adaptarse a nuestras cinturas, mientras los soldados acampan en tierra rival. El cirílico de blanco sobre el ala de cisne negro no es plan de batalla para ningún general. Pero mis ojos son indolentes. Esos caminos no rajarán el mundo. Irascible llamado de la gallina de agua a los aviones que sobrevuelan, luego estoy de nuevo dentro de un argumento gesticulado, aún basado en las cuevas. Necesitamos más. Quieren lo nuestro. Codicia y miedo de nuevo. Los sauces dragan el lago, las anguilas archivan historias de barro. Es hora de reemplazar los dioses tribales. Han empezado y ganado todas las guerras. Pueblos del libro deberían votar esos libros. Llega un momento en que la sangre pesa más que la tinta. Así que déjenme ser ocioso. He pintado todas las motas bellas. He sobretendido, luego entendido, sin ilumine ni audiencia. Mi padre está muerto. Dejemos que las tortugas de carbón húmedo cuiden el pedestal. Cantaremos nuestros himnos a los peces. Una gaviota bate una nube en aguas bajas. Tu sueño se perturba. Eres almuerzo. Lo que nos rodea no está sereno. Los cuervos cantan corderito. Cada maleza es una contienda, pero es la violencia del ojo que parpadea, el zumbido de la piel. Así que déjenme ser ocioso. Encadena cada hombre poderoso a bancos de madera gastados hasta que la infusión del canto de los pájaros someta sus manos. Los párpados inmovilizados se rendirán a un día de forraje casual. Es simplístico decir, simplístico negar. Necesitamos hacedores de paz que patrullen nuestras cabezas. Con el ocio como plegaria, capacitarnos para decir basta. La inteligencia escuchará a medida que cada día se vuelve su propia declaración de intención.
Les, muchísimas gracias por esa lectura. Quisiera realizarle algunas preguntas. Bueno, y también el agradecimiento a Mario por esa lectura al español que nos ha realizado. Bueno, él es Según tu biografía, tienes una experiencia bastante amplia en la divulgación de la poesía. Hablábamos de poesía en los autobuses, de poesía en los ríos. Yo quisiera preguntarte el por qué es importante llevar la poesía a todos esos espacios. ¿Qué es lo que le aporta la poesía a la vida de la gente? Estás muteado, Mario.
The question is this, that you've given your biography, you've been involved in poetry on the buses, for example, and there's even a project with poetry is projected on the surface of a river, or and there's this movement toward spreading poetry around a little bit. So what is the importance, or what is the significance of taking poetry to these other places, of poetry sort of being everywhere? Why this gesture? What does it mean to you, and what do you feel it accomplishes?
Australia and Colombia live in opposite ends of the spectrum. I know, I've been incredibly lucky to know that poetry is at the core of Colombian culture, whereas in Australia it's at the absolute bottom of the cultural spectrum, social spectrum. For me, the principal chore all of us practitioners in Australia have to do is to bring poetry to a wider audience, new ears.
Okay.
I'll say more after the translation.
Él dice que él se da cuenta que Australia y Colombia están a polos opuestos en el espectro, que él se dio cuenta cuando estuvo aquí que la poesía estaba en el alma o en el corazón de la cultura colombiana, el centro de la cultura colombiana. En cambio, en la cultura australiana es la cosa más despreciada que tienen. Entonces, la tarea de cualquier poeta australiano es buscar que gente nueva, que otros sectores del pueblo conozcan la palabra poética y que les llegue de otras maneras, porque la cultura como tal en este momento no está valorando la poesía. Y que va a decir más al respecto, va a contestar más. Les?
The buses, at that time I caught an industrial bus to work, factory workers, and to see a debate break out in my crowded bus with factory workers every time a new poem came up on the edge of the bus was a sign to me of that poetry can be relevant. And I know in Latin America, poetry has led the way, both my time in Colombia and in Nicaragua, just to see that it is an important, vibrant, living part of life.
Okay. Entonces, él dice que, por ejemplo, en la época en que estaban poniendo poesía en los buses, él iba en un bus industrial, o sea, un bus que ya llevaban los trabajadores a una fábrica, un bus de obreros a trabajar, y ver que cada vez que aparecía un poema nuevo en el bus, inmediatamente empezaba un debate acerca de significados y de qué quería decir y qué era cuál era la parte importante del poema. Y solo ver eso le dio la esperanza y le confirmó que la poesía puede ser algo esencial e importante. Que, de nuevo, repite que él ha visto de primera mano en Latinoamérica la importancia, el papel de liderazgo que tiene la poesía. Lo ha visto en Medellín y lo ha visto en Nicaragua también. Y que eso lo alienta a ver que es una parte viva de la cultura.
Muy bien, Luis, muchísimas gracias. Tú has escrito un artículo donde hablas de los festivales de poesía, hablas de la diversidad de culturas que confluyen a estos encuentros. Nosotros sabemos que los festivales son importantes para el público, porque al mismo tiempo son muy importantes para los poetas que reciben grandes aprendizajes. Yo quería que nos hablaras un poco de eso, de por qué es importante un encuentro de un festival para un escritor.
He says that you've written on occasion about the effect of being at a poetry festival and being in the middle of representatives of so many different cultures who have come together and who are poets, and that particular experience is a transformative experience. Now, we always hope that that's obviously the case for the audience, but he wanted to ask you, what about the poets? What is that experience? What effect? How does a poetry festival influence or change a poet?
First, I want to say the work of the Medellín Festival and the World Poetry Movement, I dare say it's as fundamental to the future of the world. I'd love to follow that dream. Of course, the audience is the core raison d'etre that I come to a festival. I learn so much from the people I meet in the host country, but at the same time, there's an extraordinarily strong element of camaraderie amongst the poets who come from the four corners of the globe. Sometimes poets aren't that supportive of each other, but in international festivals, we're all jet-lagged, hungover, maybe a little bit sick, in strange circumstances, and we are really supportive of each other, which is another thing I love.
Sí, que primero que todo, él quiere decir que el trabajo que ha hecho el Festival de Poesía de Medellín y que el trabajo que hace el Movimiento Mundial de la Poesía, él se atreve a decir que es fundamental para el futuro del mundo. Y dice que también, como se atreve a decir eso, se arriesga, está dispuesto a seguir ese sueño. Dice que obviamente el público es la razón de ser de un festival y que cada vez que él va a un sitio nuevo es incalculable todo lo que él aprende del pueblo de ese sitio, de ese país o de esa ciudad. Pero que también hay un elemento que es importantísimo en reunir poetas de países totalmente diferentes, dispersos geográficamente, y que estén juntos. Algo tan extraño como ser poeta, este grupo junto, y que es casi siempre existe un sentimiento, un espíritu de hermandad. Él dice, obviamente hay una tradición de que los poetas quizás no se tratan tan bien unos a los otros, pero en el contexto de los festivales internacionales hay algo de que todos se acabaron de bajar de un avión, todos tienen jet lag, ninguno se ha adaptado a la dieta local todavía, todos están un poquito perdidos, no saben dónde están, que de alguna manera eso ayuda a que se puedan crear unas amistades duraderas y unos nexos con gente de culturas totalmente diferentes.
Muy bien, Jesús. Primero, muchas gracias por esas palabras dirigidas al festival, al movimiento poético mundial. Te voy a hacer otras dos preguntitas para finalizar. Vale.
Okay.
Entonces, yo quisiera que nos contaras un poco, nos dejaste con una curiosidad increíble por saber otras acciones que hayas realizado. Ya nos contaste el del bus, del autobús, ya nos contaste el del río. No sé si nos puedas contar otras 2, 3 experiencias que hayas realizado en Australia para la difusión de la poesía.
Okay, he'd like to ask you 2 more fairly quick questions. The first one is, he has a consuming curiosity about hearing these projects to spread poetry around and to get it into new contexts. You've told us about the buses. You've told us a little bit. We found out a little bit about the river. Can you tell us a couple of more instances of things that have been done to make poetry sort of jump up off the page and out into the community?
One of our experiments, Sydney people may know is famous as a beachside location. We did an experiment with guerrilla poetry whereby we put up an e-publication called Guide to Sydney Beaches and inserted it into all of the search engines and different resources so that people wanting information about a particular Sydney beach got led to this Guide to Sydney Beaches, which was a combination of fantastic photography plus poetry. So you got tens of thousands of people a month visiting a site, not knowing that there was going to be poetry in it. And that's just a way of sneaking into people's consciousness. We also did a literary history of Broken Hill, a desert town, which the first poem I read was based in. And it went back over 150 years where references had been to this town, and it helped give the town a sense of its complete history and culture.
Entonces él nos cuenta de 2 ejemplos más. Uno que fue como una acción guerrillera en Sydney, fue que Sydney está al lado del mar. Entonces ellos crearon una publicación que se llamaba Guía a las playas de Sydney y la llenaron solo de poesía y de fotografías, y después lo metieron en todos los sitios y las plataformas turísticas de Australia. Y así eso significaba que si querías saber algo de las playas de Sydney, inmediatamente esta publicación aparecía, lo cual llevaba a que miles de personas cada mes les tocaba leer poesía y ver fotografías sin saber que lo iban a hacer de antemano. Era una manera como de secretar la poesía en otros ámbitos sin que la gente se diera cuenta al comienzo. Y la otra, que es muy bonita, es acerca de un pueblo del desierto australiano que se llama Broken Hill, o sea, colina rota. Y Broken Hill era un pueblo semi-abandonado, sin mucha atención de la gente, ni turística, y lo que hicieron fue que lograron escribir en poesía toda una historia, logrando contar crónicas de ese pueblo de 100 años atrás hasta ahora. El efecto fue que el pueblo volvió a nacer y gente solo por estas publicaciones que tenían que ver con la historia del pueblo ya estaban interesados en visitar el pueblo, en estar ahí un tiempo y literalmente lograron revivir este sitio en el desierto.
Muy bien, Les, muchas gracias. Ya la última pregunta es, no sé si has tenido relación con las culturas aborígenes de tu país, no sé si puedas contarnos algo en torno a su tradición oral, a cómo es la poesía, los mitos para ellos.
Right. So, the last question has to do with having contact with Aboriginal culture in your country. Whether you've had any kind of contact, and the contact that you've had, pardon me, the contact that you've had, whether it extends to some contact with their poetic tradition.
I'm not entirely sure that we can talk about a poetic tradition for the first peoples in Australia. There's certainly a long story tradition. There are a number of really superb Indigenous voices that have emerged over the last 20 years. I'm not sure in a poetic sense how much that reaches back to the core aspects of their culture. And of course, we can't talk about their culture because Australia is a continent. There are hundreds of Indigenous languages. And I don't think anybody, let alone me, would be brave enough to speak on behalf of that plenitude of cultures.
Mari, estás muteado nuevamente.
Él dice que no sabe si realmente podemos hablar de una tradición poética de los pueblos originarios de Australia, porque la poesía como tal no era necesariamente parte de la cultura de esas culturas. Lo que sí era parte muy fuerte y muy antiguo es la tradición de la narrativa, de contar los hechos, ¿sí? Entonces esa es la primera cosa. Entonces, especialmente como porque para esos grupos el concepto mismo de poesía es algo mucho más reciente. Ahora, en este momento, existen muchas voces nuevas, interesantes en la poesía que vienen desde esas culturas. pero lo que él no sabe es si se podría hablar de tradición. Lo otro que es importante tener muy en cuenta es que Australia es un continente. Como continente, hay más de 100 culturas originarias en Australia, con idiomas diferentes. Entonces, él no se siente capacitado o con la autoridad de poder hablar de tanta actividad cultural y tanta variedad sin ser alguien que no ha realmente estudiado eso, porque es un tema muy profundo, muy variado en el continente.
Muy bien, entonces, Les, muchísimas gracias por sus respuestas, muchísimas gracias por las palabras amables que ha tenido para el Festival Internacional de Poesía de Medellín, por hablarnos de su cultura. Desde aquí esperamos que realmente esa actividad suya en la difusión de la poesía continúe y ya nos está dando algunas ideas para implementar aquí en Medellín.
Le digo.
Claro.
Les, he wants to thank you very much for sharing your poetry and your visions with us here today and your answers. And he also wants to thank you for your kind words about the festival and about the World Poetry Movement. And that, in fact, one of the things he takes away from this is maybe a couple of new ideas of ways we can spread poetry in our community as well. And thanks very much for everything you brought to this event.
Thank you, Mario. You were great reading, and of course it was your translations. One of the joys of the festival in Medellín was meeting you, and thanks for everything was organized so well. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Él dice que está muy, muy agradecido, que me dio las gracias a mí, porque son las traducciones mías y la lectura y todo, pero realmente quiere agradecer el evento, el festival, porque siente que todo ha sido organizado de una manera muy clara, muy directa, y que es un gran placer poder participar. Que muchas gracias.
Ok. Muchas gracias. Bueno, les cuento que ahora hemos llegado al momento de los comentarios. Vamos a ver qué nos está diciendo el público por acá. Bueno, Beatriz Estela Peña nos dice, gracias, poeta Les Wicks. Les Wicks. La hermandad poética mundial es fundamental en la construcción de una humanidad más sensible para hacer posible la paz. Jorge Torres Reyes, magnífica respuesta. Un afectuoso saludo al poeta Les Wicks desde Bogotá, Colombia. Vamos viendo por acá. Noyer Marulanda nos dice, genial, qué manera tiene de hacernos ver en el reflejo y qué manera de protestar por todos los que estamos en silencio. Bueno, a todos ustedes, muchísimas gracias. Acabamos de ver al poeta Les Wicks de Australia. Ustedes saben que seguimos con programación hasta el próximo 10 de octubre. Los voy a antojar porque mañana tenemos nada más y nada menos que a las 11 de la mañana tenemos a Jack Hirschman, que es uno de los representantes de la generación Beats en Estados Unidos. Fue compañero de Allen Ginsberg, de Carl Shapiro. Pues mañana va a estar con nosotros a las 11 de la mañana. Quiero recordarles que pueden adquirir las memorias de nuestro festival en nuestra página www.festivaldepoesiademedellin.org. Para todos ustedes, muchísimas gracias y nos vemos mañana.
El imposible realizado. 30º Festival Internacional de Poesía de Medellín.
Armed conflict is probably the greatest human failing. We continue to fail successively across the globe. The tragedy that has been Colombia has been bright in my mind, and the outrageous act of setting poetry against armed conflict is an astonishing act of bravery, and it's worked for 23 years to galvanize a community with the notions of a richer, peaceable life. A cranky call from the water hen to planes overhead, then I am back amongst gesticulated argument, still based in the caves. We need more, they want ours, greed and fear again. Willows trawl the lake, eels archive the histories of mud. Time to replace the tribal gods. They've started and won every war. The peoples of the book should throw those books away. There comes a time when blood outweighs the ink. So let me be lazy. I have painted all the pretty specks, done the overstand, then the understand without illuminates or audience. My father is dead. Let the wet cold tortoises mine the flint, well sing our hymns to fish. A seagull is whisking a cloud in the shallows. Your sleep is disturbed, your lunch. What surrounds us is not serene. Crows are singing, little lamb. Each weed is a contest, but it's the violence of a blinking eye, hum of the skin, so let me be lazy. Chain each man of power to weathered wooden benches until the infusion of bird call overwhelms their hands. Immobilized eyelids will surrender to a day of casual forage. You know, it's simplistic to say, simplistic to deny. We need peacekeepers to patrol our heads. With lazy as our prayer, train ourselves to say enough. Intelligence will listen as each day becomes its own statement of intent. Gracias. Don Quixote. Don Quixote, we have no choice but to try. Poetry is what I do. Poetry is what these marvelous assembly of writers from around the globe have come here. It's what we all do. And it's not the perfect answer, but it's what little we can do to affect the world. And I have seen personally where poetry can affect a human being, change their lives. Can it change a people? Can it change the dynamics of a conflict? Maybe, maybe not. But there was a famous quote from a general once when he was addressing his men. He stood up and said, "Men, the situation is hopeless. We must therefore redouble our efforts." The League of Lovely Women. think their shields are mirrors. I love their fierce white teeth. My women roar. Face paint shatters on a belly laugh. They plot with a potted glare, then march on down the stair without wobble, wand, or weave. Cloaked in the black cloth of fire and desks, one pride. Strange, strange partners, they adopt their wounds. No wife, maid, no nun or mum is tamed. The neck sometimes submits while the brain punches back. We strutting sons stomp blithely on a perilous parquet. There's more, you say, and you'd be right. Hold them to your ear and hear the gibber of the waves. As crazy as men, contentment is suborned intent. They are everywhere, like headlights, randomly illuminate as they move, and sometimes choose to shine on you. Poetry is a beautiful dance. Sometimes it can be absolutely clear and everybody can understand it and pick it up. Other poems are denser, they need time. You'll have it come across your ears once, but then you need to read it twice or a third time, and then you find the inner depth and beauty, the prisms within that poem, and that's a treasure that we can all share. I can certainly share it. I've loved reading the other poets' work here, particularly from Latin and South America, because it's a more robust poetry, it's a richer poetry, it's a denser poetry than what's happening in much of the West. I grew up in outer suburbs of Sydney. There are only 3 books in our house, so I didn't have a lot to grow from, but I was experimenting with words. As a child, I suppose I used words to get myself into and out of trouble regularly. Aeolus at the Mulga. The desert wind wears a blunt dust. Cantankerous yap lifts sheet metal from the depths of snub-nosed Silverton buses, all cut like raw opal, pressed into a humiliating servitude, windbreaks for camels. Punctuation of crows affixed on air. The land is your lungs, but flies have retired as the gale wails. Ants flummoxed by a vertebrae of quartz, red-veined beneath this lee, my eyes are lost. The wind is a tide, only bones bask on gasping sand. That rue spine sits prissy, 90 degrees against the perimeters of stone. Go deep, don't assume, refrain. A huff of emus disperse like seeds as I approach. This is a vacated day. Feet crash on paper. We have built much, the skipsy jeans that jitter past our hands. Falter. This adamant shuts the mouth, comes over, spits. That coming shine we smelt from rocks, death by a purpose still, destiny to bend, the nuisance of new sense. Only dry scat is left on 100-kilometer mat. Concession is a prayer, excoriation. We make brushes. God could be a wind, and heaven is a spot safely away from his hands. Gracias. Colombians have to understand that this is the world's biggest poetry festival. the logistics, the research, the translation, it's mind-boggling, and it's done with such style, such relaxed elegance, that I'm breathless, and I know other Australians who've been here in previous years tell exactly the same story. The festival is a marvel. It's a treasure for your nation, and it has to be preserved.
Al igual que el ala de un pájaro curabón peinando enredos de aire, o el pulso del odre de agua en este lago saciado, ay, déjenme ser ocioso. A la vera del turno del chillido del murciélago, frutos de hollín de un árbol que anida los chamizos, se acumulan junto al arroyo estrecho. Un diminuto dique de consecuencia renacuaja, blancas cacatúas se malezan, refunfuñan, aún no podemos pedir quietud, así que déjenme ser ocioso. Los mercados de bolsas se desinflan, luego se disparan, el dinero balbucea alrededor del mundo, los caminos se estiran para adaptarse a nuestras cinturas, mientras los soldados acampan en tierra rival. El cirílico de blanco sobre el ala de cisne negro no es plan de batalla para ningún general. Pero mis ojos son indolentes. Esos caminos no rajarán el mundo. Irascible llamado de la gallina de agua a los aviones que sobrevuelan, luego estoy de nuevo dentro de un argumento gesticulado, aún basado en las cuevas. Necesitamos más. Quieren lo nuestro. Codicia y miedo de nuevo. Los sauces dragan el lago, las anguilas archivan historias de barro. Es hora de reemplazar los dioses tribales. Han empezado y ganado todas las guerras. Pueblos del libro deberían votar esos libros. Llega un momento en que la sangre pesa más que la tinta. Así que déjenme ser ocioso. He pintado todas las motas bellas, he sobretendido, luego entendido, sin ilumine ni audiencia. Mi padre está muerto. Dejemos que las tortugas de carbón húmedo cuiden el pedestal. Cantaremos nuestros himnos a los peces. Una gaviota bate una nube en aguas bajas. Tu sueño se perturba. Eres almuerzo. Lo que nos rodea no está sereno. Los cuervos cantan corderito. Cada maleza es una contienda, pero es la violencia del ojo que parpadea, el zumbido de la piel. Así que déjenme ser ocioso. Encadena cada hombre poderoso a bancos de madera gastados hasta que la infusión del canto de los pájaros someta sus manos. Los párpados inmovilizados se rendirán a un día de forraje casual. Es simplístico decir, simplístico negar. Necesitamos hacedores de paz que patrullen nuestras cabezas. Con el ocio como plegaria, capacitarnos para decir basta. La inteligencia escuchará a medida que cada día se vuelve su propia declaración de intención.
This is Mythopoeia. She, from Bear Garden steps through a hedge, past the suburb's last house, playing fields made enormous by night, to the blind lawn edge, where tree lines inhale the dark, the glittering stones, silent storm drains, sky, the stars silent. And if a red hair were to slide from ancient grass, a sly and ancient light would come if she wished it. And she wished to be a whole animal, not this chimera, fog-bodied and written in the dark and written into the wandering ring where late hours press against her body. The red hair stands up inside a man. Tea tree and fire step him out, breathe through him a night magic, formed and strong, and he tells her, Kandanga, Darua Rungu, Mananga, Giribanga, star falling at night, go back. Wind lines through seething tussock are moving in, and it is midnight. It is midnight over everyone we have loved. She was there with you, Mintawari, with you the whole time, but you were not with her. Gamma, nights of winter, of cloud, mauve grey and thin. Mangroves drop in the frost-formed creek. Water climbing in darkness. A white dog crosses the clearing, stops, startled by apparitions. He rotates an ear in that enormous stellar bowl, and I know this place, this stone-lit track and snarl of sloping trees. My brother, sleep has stolen from us this landscape, this sky wandered by satellites and moist, heavy winds. A raven spits on a hip of road, its disemboweled fox thrown from reach by passing lorries. And I knew you then, my brother. I knew your stillness and did not flinch at the crash of midnight birds. In fog, in scarce Pleiades light, I tasted salt on your mouth, and in your beard the dawn.
I was 34 years of age when I met my mother, and that was when poetry came close. I had to relearn my life, the life that was taken away from me when I was born. And only poetry could do that, because poetry understands feelings and emotions. Poetry is not always about the writing of poetry. I think some poets forget that, and they get caught up in their self-importance. But that's not good for poetry. A good poet will read many poets from around the world, and coming to Medellín has allowed me to meet many new indigenous and wise and strong poets. And when I'm at home and I'm back by myself, I can still read their words. I can still keep Medellín alive in my heart in Australia. My mother was born under a tree in the desert.
Mi madre nació bajo un árbol en el desierto.
When she was 4 years old,
Cuando ella tenía 4 años,
atomic bombs were dropped on our country.
Cuando ella tenía 4 años, tiraron bombas atómicas sobre nuestro país.
The family had to leave the desert.
Y la familia tuvo que abandonar el desierto.
And my mother was taken away from her mother.
Y mi madre fue arrebatada de los brazos de su madre.
She worked really hard for Aboriginal people.
Ella trabajó muy duro por todos los pueblos aborígenes.
When she died, she was like in the top job in Canberra with the government.
Cuando ella murió, estaba en el trabajo más importante con pueblos aborígenes dentro del gobierno australiano.
This is my last love poem to my mother.
Este poema es el último poema de amor que escribí para mi madre.
we took her from the city and put her back into the land.
Nosotros la sacamos de la ciudad y la volvimos a llevar al territorio.
My mother screams as I touch her hair, attempting to brush away the coarseness with my hands, to entwine twigs filled with leaves into her locks, a tiara of green to soften her face. And our tears dry now, my mother is frailing. She talks only to those who have gone before, no longer seeing my love, no longer needing. And the wailing bursts from her mouths as she sinks to the ground, her mother, the earth, and my mother, the dying. Throws sand in her face, tasting the grit in her mouth, and wailing louder, throws herself forward, pushing her breasts into the softness of the earth, her mother, and my mother, the dying, crawls down into that final embrace. Her conversation incoherent now, as if like a child she is practicing words for the lifetime to come. And the syllables loud and guttural spill over the sand, her mother, the earth, and I walk away leaving her there in that cradle, safely nestled in the roots of that tree, safe in our country, our solace, her grave. The biggest influence in my poetry were the old people that lived in the desert. We used to write our poetry on our body. We used to write our poetry in the caves. We used to write our poetry in the sand. And quite recently in Australia, we write the poetry in books. So maybe only for 20 years, Aboriginal people in Australia have been making poetry books. So it's very new. The old people in the desert, they taught me to sit in our traditional country and to listen, because the stories stay in the land. And if you learn to listen, you can listen to the stories that your grandmother listened to when she was a little girl. You can listen to the stories that have been lying in that land since creation. It's a very big gift that they gave me. When you hear those stories, the poetry comes to your heart. And you have to learn the skills of poetry to be able to put that on the page. I really enjoy meeting other Indigenous people from around the world and tell them that story, because our stories are similar. Our love for the land inspires our poetry. Our stories live in our land.
Nuestras historias viven en nuestro territorio.
If you sit and listen really quietly, you can hear the land talk.
Si ustedes se sientan y escuchan en silencio, pueden oír cómo el territorio habla.
As people, we belong to the land.
Como pueblo le pertenecemos al territorio.
The land does not belong to us.
El territorio no nos pertenece.
We can't sell it.
No podemos venderlo.
And mining is very bad.
Y la minería es terrible.
Julpul. Life is extinct without birdsong. Dream birds arrive at dawn. Message birds tap at windows. Guardian birds circle the sky. Watcher birds sit nearby. Fill my ears with birdsong. I will survive. Most Indigenous people in the world are suffering. We are still fighting for our land. We are still fighting to stop the mining. We're still fighting to keep our family together. A lot of my poetry is about emotion, because I was taken away from my family. I had a lot of sadness. So the old people in the desert, they taught me how to start healing that sadness, to live a happy life. And I try to share that in my poetry. I think it's the most important thing I can do. Birds, we call them julpul, are very important to us.
Los pájaros son muy importantes para nosotros y los llamamos yupu.
Julpul.
Tupu.
We believe they are the spirits of our loved ones who have passed away.
Y creemos que son los espíritus de personas amadas que han muerto.
Hours. In stillness I lay, hours before the dawn. An owl wakens me from slumber. Crew, 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 crew. In softness I lay, listening to its call. Crew, 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 crew. In calmness I lay to empty my mind. Is it a message or simply a song? Crew, 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 crew. I think the importance of poetry is that it starts as an individual process. When you are reading the poetry, you can be alone. But there's a big process about those words and those feelings and the wisdom of those words entering your body and your mind. And then you move towards some sort of understanding. I think that's a very powerful thing. Often with music or film, the message is sort of told to you, but in poetry, it's very individual. And we need to honor ourselves as individual.
I can't stop drinking, I tell you true. Since I watched my daughter perish, she burned to death inside a car. I lost what I most cherish. I seen the angels hold her as I screamed with useless hope. I can't stop drinking, I tell you true. It's the only way I cope. I can't stop drinking, I tell you true. Since I found my sister dead. She hung herself to stop the rapes. I found her in the shed. That rapist bastard still lives here, unpunished in this town. I can't stop drinking, I tell you true, since I cut her down. I can't stop drinking, I tell you true, since my mother passed away. They found her battered down the creek. I miss her more each day. My family blame me for her death. Their words have made me wild. Can't stop drinking, I tell you true, because I was just a child. So if you see someone like me who's drunk and loud and cursing, don't judge too hard, because you don't know what sorrows we are nursing.
In this big world that is growing more crazy, mad, greedy, selfish, disrespectful, we need to keep the process of poetry simple in our hearts. I think poetry is also really important because maybe it is very ancient art form. Maybe poetry was given to us from creation. When people first started walking around the earth, before the modern world, I think a lot of what they would have been speaking was poetry. So poetry has always been, and it always will. And I think history proves that when the world gets in a mess, poetry rises. A lot more people are reading poetry today than 10 years ago because of political climates. I know that's true in my own country. I think a lot more people are writing poetry, not always for the sake of getting published. Because if you were writing poetry, maybe you're not going to kill yourself, because there are so many people who are really, really hurting. There are so many bad things happening in the world. In my country, the Aboriginal suicide rate is the highest in the world because we can't stop the mining on our land. The government won't stop taking the children away. People are poor and hungry. The sadness is always there. But if you have one poetry book and you can read something that makes sense and gives you some focus for the day, then you will live day by day.
See you, I said to the children, as I memorized their Anagal faces, filled with laughter and trust in family, innocent in their youth and strong in culture. See you, I said to the elders, as the tears flow in my heart and I bend down to shake their hands and gain my strength by skin. See you, I said at Merbicha, and the dust from my car as I drove away was like a ribbon across the desert sand, tying me to that place forever.
Love poem. He had LOVE etched across his clenched right fist, followed by POEM etched in a vagabond's quill across the other, and with these fists coming at you in unison, you copped a little taste of his love poem. He walked the crooked lines of this world, straightening them out with a little love poem. My old man fixed the world with his fists. In his memory, I give the world a little love poem. He'd start out with the poem and then he'd flourish it with some love. His 1-2-2-1 strategies with bloody tattooed gloves. He no longer used his real name, just a combination of slugs. Love poem. Love poem. Poem, love, love, poem. Poem, love, love, poem. This hard, crooked world could use some tenderizing with a little bit of my love poem. Love poem. Love poem. Buenas noches, Medellín. I am a monster. I cannot speak my grandmother's tongue, and I've never been on my grandfather's land. I've traveled here and I've traveled there. My culture fabricated in government-funded laboratories. I am Frankenstein of the dream time. I am Frankenstein of the dream time. Reanimated flesh that once sung natural song lines, I surgically removed my Christian soul and repaired it with indigenous design. A patriot to a black, yellow, and red flag, yet I am colorblind. I am Frankenstein of the dream time. I'm a mutation of the white Australia policy. I am Frankenstein of the dream time. I am the Australian dream's living nightmare. I am an educated Aborigine. I am Frankenstein of the dream time. I scare white people with my English. I am Frankenstein of the dream time. Thinking black is a thought crime. I have no need for queen or desecrated country, but only Australian nationalism can define. I'm a renegade of Indigenous context. I am Frankenstein of the dream time. Muchas gracias, Medellín.
Assume unbelievers. Don't believe in land rights, don't believe in freedom, don't believe in nation, believe in changing, believe in lying, believe in killing on another. We're sad cries you pretend. We're happy jokes thrown, you laugh aloud, not heard. We're here pain you don't explain. Seen clashes scrum your life's position, seen attracting tussles come between your love emotions, seen children's rights worshipped and parents apprehensive about performing. Don't believe in flamboyant blacks, don't believe in novels adapted for white society, don't believe cultural dances dancing for scum, false showcases, even sport arena as prime time for such classes, a little time for poor colors. Even love is made to sell. Even feelings are prescriptions. Sure, superficial varieties are at the doors, yet death is a preceding goalpost for the most. Sure, embedded hate is silence. Sure, entice commercial is obbling the mindless. Yes, win at a peak eye in massive unity. Yes, pre-match the fight reports of land-clearing crows. Yes, come affectionate to people. Who are you tonight? Who are you today? Don't believe in land rights. Believe in pubs. Believe in not. Who are you telling me what belief is?
Atribuido a los incrédulos. No creen en los derechos de la tierra, no creen en la libertad, no creen en la nación, creen en cambiar, creen en mentir, creen en matarse unos a otros. Hubo llantos tristes que ustedes provocaron, hubo bromas alegres desprendidas de su risa en voz alta, no fueron oídas. Hubo un dolor intenso que ustedes no explicaron. Hemos visto choques y enfrentamientos en las actitudes de sus vidas. Hemos visto venir pugnas que llaman la atención, interponerse con sus emociones. Hemos visto idolatrar los derechos de los niños y a padres que se niegan a ejercerlos. No creemos en los negros ostentosos, no creemos en la adaptación de novelas para las sociedades blancas, no creemos en los bailarines culturales que bailan en falsos espectáculos de escoria. Incluso la arena deportiva es un espacio propicio para dichas clases y muy poco tiempo para los colores pobres. Incluso el amor está hecho para venderse. Incluso los sentimientos son prescripciones. En las puertas, con certeza, hay una gran variedad. Sí, la muerte es un objetivo a priori para la mayoría. El odio inculcado es el silencio. La seguridad comercial obstaculiza a los insensatos. Sí, triunfar en la cima de las unidades de masas. Sí, igualar los reportes de la lucha y los cantos por la tierra. Sí, llegar afectuosos a la gente. ¿Quién eres tú esta noche? ¿Quién eres tú hoy? No crees en los derechos de la tierra, crees en tabernas, no creo en aquellos que me dicen lo que significa creer.
Narcissism. 1. Toes. Toes want to be fingers. They move like the stumps of amputated limbs or the beginner's flesh of womb life. Underwater, in the bath, they're as happy as dugongs. Look at them now, patient before you on the worn earth. They're like history in the way they're forgotten, in the way they precede our every step. 2. Skin. Skin is only skin deep, but oh, how it promises profundity. It invented the vampire, infantile and pornographic, the fantasy of devouring. New lovers feel supernatural but their fingertips are coy. They count birthmarks, mapping triangles and constellations. They are flirting with the surface of things, disguising the depth of their desire with science. 3. Fingers. Fingers reveal our monkey origins. My gold ring remains unassailable, beauty doing its job. Is the love of beauty what defines us? Though I have heard some monkeys scale cliffs to watch sunsets, and King Kong preferred a blonde. Thumbs are said to ground the Homo sapiens. Certainly children are content with the earth. Men too often seem to care less. It's women who manage civilization, set hard in their acrylic nails. I knew a hairdresser once who couldn't pleasure herself because of them. 4. Hair. Hair still belongs on corpses. We're not surprised to see it there. There's something of the tendrils of the brain or earth about it. No wonder women rip it off their bodies, though it keeps on growing, dragging us towards our fate like Rapunzel's cursed mane. 5. Eyes. Eyes are for those brave enough to look. They offer you the possibility of seeing a soul and of having your soul seen, of gorging on someone else's secret self and of emptying your own clean. Sunglasses are for protection. 6. Mouths. Mouths are honest. They're wet and alive, only sleeping when you do. They inhale, exhale, whisper, scream, lie, bite, chew, swallow, suck. Your mouth gives you life, and you could live for it.
They huddle in dusk at the back of the temple and pray to be clean, to be favoured of God. They submit to the chill of scriptoria. They enter the lonely retreats of the wallpapered rooms, in thrall to the terrible whisper of what is the case. They will set down its phrases. Here is a man with a glint in his eye and a victim. This is the impact that shrapnel can have on the bone. Look, they will say, at this lifetime of days without courage or care for the other. And listen, listen, they say. This is a man as he falls. This is the girl for whom no lovers came. This is the unhappy fate of the man who spoke up. Galaxies wheel past regardless. Earth shines and shines in its light. The writers go into themselves with their books and their quarrels, their small, funny ways. They know that you cannot just name wrongs and leave it at that. They search for the spaces that people might enter together. They think that the music of words might lead sideline to life. Year after year, they examine the feasts, the omnivores. Thorough, and quick with suggestions, hopeful but not trusting hope. They know that there must be a way to imagine a gentleness. Let us remember them all. It is all the same war. Lay our wings over them. Kingfisher gleams over those who have died in the braiding of spaces. The war between instincts and words, between gestures and genes. The peoples who vanished like clouds in the untallied years, whose tribes were defeated, whose boundaries are shadow and wind. Those who sat down in the lean years because too many bore in the good ones. Those who were herded by iron in the corners of drought. Let us feather their bones with our stories. Ruffle the air they once breathed with the blue veins of grief. Who were food for the gods, who died in the turf wars because they were bloodline or of them. Because they were part of a text that required them to lose. It is all the same battle, the same bitter hormones, the same tumbleweed and kaleidoscope flurry of grounds. Those who became inconvenient, who were dealt on the wrong side of claims, who were swept from their fields by Napoleon's ants, by Genghis's ants, or by Akbar's. The boys who were not the right type, and the women who were. It is all the one war, to invent ourselves human, to word ourselves more than we are. Let us fold them in the azure of our wings. Those who were defeated by their readings, those who played their words against themselves, who died for their freedoms, who died because terrors like freedom were too much to bear. Let us brush them with the sheen of our attention, this riffle of lustre, our sorrow, this brief spill of water and light, which is Warwood King.
Martin Langford de Australia.
Buenos Aires is a poem which I dedicate to people of Colombia because they are such good dancers.
Él quiere dedicarle este poema al público de Colombia porque los considera muy buenos bailarines.
Because there is no ground but the dancing between us. Stars flare and fizzle like matches. The authorized histories step in, step out, do-si-do. The bedrock waves by as it vanishes. All the needs hokey and shake with their best angles in. No ground at all but the language frail rafts of our capering. Pelvises scissor and coo down the long night of crossroads. Over, sink into their walls and initiate toes. The certainties bleed like a newly flensed romance. Who am I now that she's gone? Who are you? Good questions circle and slide off the Opera House jetty. And there's no ground but leaning, half falling towards and away from our recusant others. No ground but legs and their fancy work, bones and their song.
My first poem is called How Do Detectives Make Love? How did my parents make love? Was it in the 1950s way, in their pyjamas, under the blankets? Could my father switch off from his job as he switched the light off? When he made love with my mother in the dark, did they laugh? Even though he told me he couldn't bear to fuck her unless he was drunk? Did he still pick up the bits and pieces of people from under trains or leftovers from motorbike accidents? The bloodied thighs and thighless women and eyeless torsos? Did he fondle the falling away breasts of bloated corpses dragged from rivers with concrete boots? Was my mother's body the autopsy or the imitation pornography from his blue movie? And was his penis a .38 automatic or the black baton that he used to strike out with? Was their marital bed like the cold river bottom churning with unfounded death? How do detectives make love? Did he talk code into her soft earlobe or whisper sweet double talk into her lips? Did he tape record her nocturnal sighs and her vulnerable words, taking them down into his notepad heart to be withheld and used in a court of law as evidence against her? Did he keep her writhing loss of self under strict surveillance? Could he love her, opening up his blue shirt or plain clothes up to her, dropping away his folded arms, his handcuffs and identification badge? Could he forget the prostitutes, drug addicts, screaming domestics, battered wives, shootouts and suicides, the women in prison and the raped and bloodied murdered women? Could he switch off from them like he switched the bedroom light off? What did he feel in the dark with my mother's warm body beside him? Could he let himself be seen fully by her lovely half-open sexy eyes, or by hard courthouse hearings and underworld gazes threatening to remember him, expose and destroy him? Did he go undercover for fear of being found? Did he take down her details or have her followed? Could he give a full description of the woman who loved him? Did my mother find a trembling and vulnerable man? Did she fingerprint and file him? Could he be revealed a second before orgasm, only to be charged with breaking and entering, before his own little death, before the loud phone rang, before the infringing 24-hour call, the hurried reaching for his dressing gown in the cold and stabbing air, the impatient rap at the door? Could he love her the way that she loved him? Or would he charge her with trespass, his cold heart prohibited, jammed up in car wreckages, alone on grey train platforms pursued by criminals, bashed up in nightclubs or King's Cross brothels, sobbing in empty patrol cars or in big dark paddy wagons, darkly in love, completely alone, with bitten down thumbnails on the neighbourhood rounds, in the early hours of the morning, the doubtful silences of her waiting, the two-way radio left on, becoming fuzzy, switched off, the heart imprisoned, her sigh, his cough. Thank you.
Pine trees come most alive, dripping with resin in a fire. I've got a hot date with death. Will she be my boiling Celt? Will we dare the white horses? Dewy together, death and I, hot sea blue, or will death be my curly corkscrew Jew? I'm you, she moans, knocking me to the floor of an old blood hotel, sucking out my breath. Oh, death! I never knew you in a dress, in high heels, just the melt of your breasts, the forklift of your tongue. I can't bring home a devil to meet my mother. But I won't ring for a taxi. I'm not leaving until you tell me about yourself. Let's talk, death. Can't we be friends? Is it all sex with you? Do you like cricket? Do you like tennis? What did you think of this year's film festival? Sip your long black, slowly, death. I want to know you. Do you want to be my second cousin twice removed? Celt or Jew, you'll never be English, death. I said goodbye to all that with my last Anglican communion. I can't remember the wafer. I couldn't get drunk on the wine. Celt or Jew, breath or dew, you'll never be faithful. I'll never be true, because death, I'm not simple, and neither are you.
Minga, minga, minga. At the poetry reading last night, a woman read a poem about ecologically sustainable population. And I noticed how the initials were the same as ESP. She also told us in a poem that Chernobyl means wormwood, which among other things is a repellent for ants. And I was reminded of what the Anangu said people climbing Uluru looked like. Minga, ants, they said. Minga, 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 they laughed. Myron read a lot of poems about death to the mainly elderly audience. And in the taxi home, the Hungarian driver told us he gives thanks every morning when he wakes. And he's happy for the rest of the day. Myron said, what about all the problems of the world? Don't they bother you? What problems? The driver said. There aren't any problems. When we got to Myron's, we listened to the radio and talked about everything under the sun. I walked home in the cold about 2 o'clock and my kitchen bench was covered in ants. Minga, 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 I said to them.
When will the kennel man come? When will the kennel man come? The dogs are barking and the moon is gone. The owls are out in the eyes of the Doberman Pinscher, hunting low. When will the kennel man come? Deep in the forest the kittens are lost. The dogs are gnawing the soundless bone as stars glow in a measureless paddock. When will the kennel man come? The bowls are empty and the barn's gone black, and the eyes of the dogs are scratching the scents from the winter yard. When will the kennel man come? The kennel mate has fallen over the whimpering hound by the door. The dogs are snapping at flies. The coonhounds are running the rivers and lamplight is scourging the lake. The whelps are baying like swans, nailed by their wings to the gate. If only the kennel man would come, out of the long grass, out of the orchard where the fruit's gone bad, out of the shadows of the prowler's face. When will the kennel man come? And which one of you, my dogs, should I watch? Which for the scent of his kill, and which for his pitying whistle?
Bolsas plásticas. Bolsas plásticas. Gente sigue dándome bolsas plásticas. Everywhere I shop, I get a bolsa plástica. Todo me viene en bolsas plásticas. Glad wrap, bubble pack, styrofoam, party pack. Todo es plástico y todo es mierda. Plastic plates, knives, forks, spoons, cups, caps, bottles, boxes, bins, buckets, and bolsas plásticas. I went to the vet with a sick gato. They gave it back to me in a bolsa plástica. Cuando te mueres y te ponen en un coffin, it's plastic line. So when you go all rotten, you slop about. HUL is muy mal because they got you wrapped up in a bolsa plástica. Plástico, it's around my lunch. It lines the bins we put our lunch bags in. Quise cellophane, pero todo es igual a un baby in a big dry cleaner bag. It's a major misdemeanor. El tipo de metarte, plástico, blue, y todos los niños inhalando blue. The blue wouldn't quedan bajo plastic bags too. And para todas nosotras mujeres en the rags, I'm amazed I haven't come up with a bolsa plástica. Imagine the fun. You could tirarlo at a rapist and mira, él corre, but you better ten cuidado, they'll sneak attack it, permitido in a plastic Mac, so no ensucia su ropa when he jack, and it's just as well, porque decida aún Porsche se vienen en bolsas plásticas. Plástico vuelve elástico mi mente till it snaps like a rubber band, and I go with plástico from plastic bag right on the bolsa dicta. I save them all up and put them in the closet. No puedo enfrentar al hombre frutero sin 15 bolsas plásticas viejos en mi mano. So momentito, Jackie, no envuélvelo en plástico y papel bag. No significa que I'm right, gonna vision del futuro. No hay más tierra, just miles and miles of bolsas plásticas. El poderoso símbolo of these days, estos días milagrosos, these throwaway days. When I dig it all up en los años que vienen, is a bolsa plástica from the local dump. A bolsa plástica or a butt plastic cup. And that just about wraps it up.
Okay, runners. A runner wearing fish shoes gets across a river well ahead of his competitors who are wearing rabbit shoes. But will he win the race? As the course consists of 3 river crossings and 3 bodies of dry land, it's anyone's guess. Firewood. On a freezing winter night, a man goes outside to his wood pile. But instead of wood, he finds, cut into cords and neatly stacked, his family tree. Here's a leg from Lil, his father's scrawny mother. And here, one of Aunt Jane's waterlogged arms. And here, tough and knotted, one of Uncle Bob's hands. And here, but it's far too cold to go on with this. Grab a few and hurry back inside.
El imposible realizado. 30º Festival Internacional de Poesía de Medellín.